All right, so we're going to talk about drug addiction, alcoholism, but more importantly, the mental health crisis that we're facing in this country, and how it all correlates, and people deserving to know the truth. So we face two problems as drug addicts and alcoholics. So the first problem being the physical piece, and how there's an abnormal reaction. So physical powerlessness. If you are a drug addict or alcoholic, your brain has an abnormal reaction to these substances, and it's over time, and maybe even the better word there would have been hypersensitivity, because the physical allergy, this thing that occurs, this reaction, this hypersensitivity, doesn't occur right away. It isn't like, oh, I drink one beer and I turn into a Incredible Hulk and I'm just like smashing things. It builds up, and it's very insidious. Whether it be pot, whether it be alcohol, it starts off with, hey man, I just had a beer, I just smoked a joint, see, it didn't cause any problem in my life. And then if you're of the alcoholic, drug addict condition, that ends up building up and building up and building up to the point where I'm smoking more and more, I'm drinking more and more, or I'm doing whatever, more and more of whatever drug. So what starts happening is when I first start using and I put drugs and alcohol in my body, drugs and alcohol release an abnormal amount of dopamine. So your average person, a baseline level of dopamine in like a euthymic state is 50 nanograms per deciliter. So somebody having a terrible day drops down to about 40 nanograms per deciliter. And this region right here, getting close to 100, is, food, sex, and, accomplishment, things that are fun, gaming, just your basic reward system, and why it motivates us to do things that we like to do. So I put drugs and alcohol in my body, and it shoots me up here with abnormal levels, methamphetamine being the highest. It takes us well above 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. So what starts to happen is the first time I use the drug, I get up here. Well, if I do the same amount tomorrow, I'm going to get a little less. And then I'm going to get a little less. And then I'm going to get a little less. And eventually what happens is I'm putting drugs and alcohol in my body, and I return back to baseline. The brain wants to regulate. It wants to return to homeostasis. So I'm back here, right? And I'm still chasing this though, oh, by the way, the brain has also decided that something good is coming from the drugs based off of down here. It's not logic and reason. It's basing it off of, hey, something's giving us a lot of dopamine. This must be good. But then it stops giving that amount of dopamine. But yet I'm still trying to chase that. And, oh, by the way, all throughout this process, I'm also developing habits and behaviors, and the things that are happening to me that are starting to be visceral or subconscious, of where my lower brain's kind of taken the control of things. So when an alcoholic or drug addict doesn't put the drugs in their body, when they are physically dependent, they drop down to 10 nanograms per deciliter. So you can imagine how somebody feels. This is somebody normally having a really, 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 really bad day. And this is a drug addict or alcoholic once the drugs and alcohol have been removed. And the cravings for drugs and alcohol have been compared to be, somebody not eating food, somebody not drinking fluids for 3 days. Size comparison being, the size of a baseball. Somebody not eating food for 5 days, and their cravings being the size of a basketball. And somebody with without having their drug of choice can have cravings the size of a baseball field in comparison. So that's just to put that into perspective. This also happens. First we'll talk about why with the drugs and alcohol first, and then we'll get into like other 12-step fellowships and why it works for them as well. So yeah, I come over here and my body starts to, it's a phenomenal craving because it's a craving that is physically happening. It is a subconscious, visceral experience. Like, it is a craving beyond mental control that happens. And it sends me on sprees, binges, and they can last any range of time. The range of time that a binge or a spree can last varies, but they always end in a consequence. Trouble with the law, trouble at work, trouble at home, trouble with my health. Something happens, or I embarrass myself, any of those things, I emerge remorseful. And I'm like, man, I need to stop using drugs and alcohol because they're ruining my life. And I want to stop. Some people just want the consequences to go away at first. That was me. I just wanted the consequences to go away. Eventually, I really did want to stop. And there's a lot of people out there that really do want to stop. And unfortunately, you can put these people on a lie detector test, and they would literally pass the lie detector test because they are being honest that they really want to stop. But people will then go and get drunk or high later that day, later that week, and you're like, well, I thought you wanted to stop. So here comes this part. So the physical piece and the powerlessness, this is only relevant if I put drugs and alcohol in my body. So they found that if I have this condition, this disease, the only safe way to not have this happen is to not put drugs and alcohol in my body. So that's, abstinence. Some people already do that, but abstinence is the only way to stop this from occurring. Well, I want to stop, but I can't. So what happens is thinking about where we were at over there and how we dropped down to 10 nanograms per deciliter, well, the brain's in a state of shock, and so, they explained not having drugs and alcohol as being restless, irritable, and discontented. Well, that's because that's symptomatic of what's going on inside of here. I'm in an extreme amount of fear, releasing all those stress hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, all those things, and I'm restless, irritable, and discontented. Nothing is making me happy. That's why, family member, friend, whoever is in a terrible mood, and they said they really wanted to stop, and now they're just, you don't even want to be around them because they're so miserable, and they don't want to be miserable, but they don't understand why. So they're, it's really defeating because they want to show up for their friends and family, but they're not able to because they're literally depleted and just in a high state of stress and fear. People are just looking at like, hey, look at what you're doing to your life with all these consequences. What are you doing? And when the brain is in this state of fear, the interesting thing is in an extreme fear response, the conscious thought, my ability to think, blanks out. So there is a literal mental blank spot that they have, that they talked about back in the 1930s that they can explain today, where the fear caused by, the lower brain, the amygdala, it can react and dive into instinctual memories or behaviors that it has gathered will make it okay. So this will actually deactivate because in an emergency moment, you can't really think clearly, and your survival mode is going to kick in. So having that happen, the mind is quite racy. You know, if I'm in a deep state of fear, I'm emotionally overwhelmed, I'm not thinking clearly, I'm not thinking straight. And that is mental unmanageability. And so something happens where I put drugs and alcohol back in my body. Well, I wanted to stop, and I really did, and people are saying, what's wrong with you? And I don't know why. I'm like, I don't know why. I got drunk or high again, you know, because my fear system's telling me that, you know, the only thing that's going to make me okay is drugs and alcohol, because I've conditioned it to function that way. So that's the problem I'm at here. So I have a problem when I put drugs and alcohol in my body. I have a problem when drugs and alcohol are no longer in my body. And so this is solved by no longer putting the substance in my body. This is what we have to deal with. How do I stop myself from putting drugs and alcohol back into my body?